There is level of detail and nuances behind this analysis that we as professionals of risk management in practice should be aware of. Because at the end of the day, why are we doing this? Let's take a step back. Why are we doing overall residual risk evaluation and comparing it to the benefits? Because we want to establish a positive benefit risk balance. That is the essence of how regulatory authorities will determine whether your product is safe and effective. That's the judgment they're going to make. So it's directly related. Well, hello everyone and welcome to our weekly live discussion. Those of you joining in the United States, I hope you all had a good, happy Thanksgiving. We certainly took a little bit break and relaxed a little bit. So I'm very glad to be with you again after our short break. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, which proves to be quite difficult in practice. And that's all about the overall residual risk evaluation and comparing it to the intended benefits. It's a very interesting topic. I'm hoping to have a good conversation with you, have a good discussion about this. Just a quick reminder for those of you especially who are joining for the first time. We do this every week and we stay here for about 30 minutes or so. We record these sessions and nothing we discuss in these discussions should be taken as regulatory advice. This is just for conversation and discussion. So having said that, I want to really invite you to participate actively. You can post a question in the Q&A box or even respond to another question, share a comment in the Q&A box about your experience with the overall residual risk evaluation. So let's get into it. And I'm going to challenge myself today to not use any slides, because when we use slides, this becomes very formal. I don't intend this to be formal at all. And this is not a lecture, not a webinar, not a one-way transmission of information with you, but the hope is to engage with you in more of a dialogue and a conversation to the best of our abilities. This is the medium we have right now. So I really invite you to participate. We'll talk a lot about the overall residual risk evaluation and why it becomes challenging. But most importantly, towards the end, I'm going to share with you some of my views, my perspectives, and actually some guidance that is available to all of us from the FDA, which I think can be quite insightful. So I'm waiting for your questions to appear. I will just start with a very quick introduction of this topic, and then we will get going. Okay, so overall residual risk evaluation, what does it mean and when do we do it? We do it typically after we have done all of our risk control implementation. We have verified them to be implemented correctly and they are effective. And then we look at our overall risk level as an aggregate in a holistic view. And again, this becomes very challenging to do in practice because there is no cookie cutter formula to apply. How do we do it? What data do we use? We work very hard during our risk analysis process, risk evaluation process, risk control process, identifying individual risks and then evaluating those individual residual risks after we have implemented our risk control measures. We can do that one by one, having identified all the sequence of events, hazardous situations, hazards, harms that may occur. So we can do all that. But when it comes to the overall residual risk evaluation, it becomes quite challenging. In fact, if you look at the ISO TR 24971 guidance, they make a statement that ultimately the evaluation should be based on expert judgment with essential roles for application knowledge and clinical expertise. They recognize that it's an exercise in judgment. And as quality and regulatory professionals, as risk management professionals, generally we are a little bit uncomfortable when a judgment has to be exercised because we want to see some objective evidence. So this becomes quite challenging. Again, I want to hear from you what kind of challenges you face, what kind of questions you have. Some of you did submit a few questions and comments at registration, and I want to share that with you in our conversation today. So Michael, you are sharing here that I'm considering plotting each individual risk on an XY chart, probability versus impact, to show a visual summation of the overall risk. How should I define acceptable versus unacceptable using the plot? Michael, you are touching upon actually one of the recommended methods in ISO TR 24971. So we use a risk matrix. For example, let's take a 5 by 5 matrix, 1 to 5 scale of severity, 1 to 5 scale of probability of harm. You have 25 basically cells where you can plot each individual risk based on its coordinates. So you are asking a very good question. How do I then, you can say that you have a graphical representation. How do you say if the overall risk is acceptable or not? So let's go step by step. In fact, I have used this methodology under certain situations, and I'll share with you how it works and why it might be justifiable in those situations. So first of all, you'll have a visual distribution of individual risks, right? Hopefully all of them are in your acceptable zone. Personally, I'm not a big fan of having a medium yellow zone. I like either unacceptable or acceptable, either red or green. So I'm gonna make the assumption you are using that, and hopefully all of your individual residual risks, let's say you have identified 10 of those. As a reminder to everybody, an individual risk corresponds to a unique hazardous situation resulting from a sequence of combination of events where one or more hazards are present and the patient or user is exposed to those hazards. So in the context of 14971, each individual risk corresponds to a unique hazardous situation combination, for example. So let's say you have 10 and you plot these 10 points on this 5 by 5 grid. Hopefully all of them are acceptable. If not, you know what to do, right? If one of the individual risks or one or more individual residual risks are not acceptable based on your criteria, you could still move forward by providing a benefit versus individual risk determination. So there you do the benefit risk analysis at an individual risk level if they are not acceptable. So you could do that. But let's take this scenario where, Michael, you are describing that you are plotting your individual residual risks on this 5 by 5 grid. And I'm assuming you have 10, and hopefully all 10 of them are acceptable. Now you have to look at the distribution. Are some of them at the boundary, at the very boundary, at the edge of acceptability and unacceptability? Are some of them clustered around on the high severity area? Or are some of them clustered around on the high probability area? What is the distribution looking like to you? You make some judgment based on that distribution and knowing the overall intended use and benefits and how if you have any history in the marketplace about this product, what is the overall assessment? You make some judgments about that. So it is not straightforward still. You might have all of them in the acceptable zone, but it is still not very straightforward. You still have to make some assumptions. So here's what I have done in my practice, working with clients with very mature products, more than 10 years of history in the marketplace. Now we know that 2019 has some new requirements, so we have to do some remediation maybe. And as a result, we are trying to update our risk management files. In those scenarios, we already have a long history of market performance and we know what the overall benefit risk level is, right? Is acceptable, first of all, it's acceptable. So we make the determination that if all individual residual risks, let's say 10 in this case, fall in the acceptable zone and they are not clustered around in a certain area, they're kind of randomly distributed somewhat, we make the judgment that our overall benefit risk is favorable and overall residual risk is also acceptable. This is a very specialized scenario with a lot of assumptions. You should document those assumptions up front. So I hope that makes sense. It's still not a straightforward answer. However, it's a good start and a very good way of looking at the overall residual risk if you have a large amount of market history for the product. Ed, you are sharing your comment here is that the area of one judgment in 14971 requires experts to participate. One of the tools they can use is the visual chart, as Michael has indicated, but they also need the total risk picture with the entire risk traceability summary showing all the risks and residual risks as estimated. So, Ed, you are bringing a point that this is your estimate. This is not exactly what might be the case in the market, right? So it's an estimate. And as a result, it also involves a level of uncertainty. So let's go a little bit fancy about this, right? Michael, you brought this up. Let's go a little bit fancy about this. Let's go back to our risk matrix and you have 10 points, each indicating an individual risk, and you plot those 10 points. You could do a 95% confidence interval around each of those points, right? You could, and see how if there's an overlap in those bubbles, do some of those bubbles kind of migrate towards the unacceptable zone? What is happening? So at the end of the day, you are making a judgment and you're also evaluating the uncertainty in your judgment. Now, taking a step back, if you have a brand new product, you are designing from scratch, design and development, you've done the best you can, your level of uncertainty at launch could be higher, right? Could be higher. Those bubbles may have a very large space that they occupy. Over time, your level of uncertainty will reduce. And that is why you have to be very vigilant. You have to do ongoing continuous monitoring and surveillance to improve your level of certainty in your estimates. But at any given point, they remain estimates. And that's a very good point, Ed, you have made, that sometimes we forget that we look at only a single point and that's it. However, there is a zone of uncertainty around each point. So there is level of detail and nuances behind this analysis that we as professionals of risk management in practice should be aware of. That is not to say that we are trying to overcomplicate things. That is not to say that we are making life difficult for our team members. But we are aware of these nuances so that we can guide and facilitate the discussion and really, really focus on the level of certainty we have in our assessments. So let's go back to the situation where we were saying it's a new product and at launch we have a high level of uncertainty. That should factor in your regulatory submission to the FDA, for example. Because at the end of the day, why are we doing this? Let's take a step back. Why are we doing overall residual risk evaluation and comparing it to the benefits? Because we want to establish a positive benefit risk balance. That is the essence of how regulatory authorities will determine whether your product is safe and effective. That's the judgment they're going to make. So it's directly related. And you better have a good case, including transparency around your level of certainty, because FDA is pretty smart. They will evaluate uncertainty on their own and then make judgment. So you better be transparent about that. We'll talk a little bit more about that using an example. Ed, you are sharing further that for the benefit side, the FDA is 4 benefit risk guidance documents. Yes, Ed, I'm going to cover that. It provides a list of the total benefit and risk categories that need to be considered. They are written as qualitative elements and show that it is not possible to provide a quantitative value for the total benefit and the total risk. Again, it's a judgment activity. Our judgment can be driven by information. We have to be careful not to have biases in our judgments. We have to watch out against those. That's why having a diverse team is very important. That's why talking to the right experts with the right experience, hands-on experience in the application is very important. So we make our best judgment at the end of the day. However, we must evaluate also the level of certainty we have in that judgment. The less certain we are about our judgment, the more vigilant we need to be in our post-market. Bijan, you are asking a question. So the question is how to make the judgment such that it is defensible. Does it pass the red face test? Right? We cannot be arbitrary about our judgment. We have to be mindful of all the information that we have and the unknowns that are still present, which should allow us to estimate the level of uncertainty. And I want to emphasize that point over and over again. If you are good about defining your level of certainty in your judgment, you're good about documenting your assumptions, you're good about creating a process, not an arbitrary conversation in a conference room with 5 people, a brainstorm activity to come up with an overall benefit risk, that is not necessarily a defensible way of doing things. It is not a brainstorm activity. In fact, FDA is very, very clear about how they look at benefit risk. Note the keywords probable benefit versus probable risks. It is not hypothetical. It is not imagined. There is some information or data around that. Whether that data is directly acquired through a clinical trial or indirectly inferred from other sources of information. But there has to be some analysis and some supporting evidence behind those conclusions. So you have to be thorough, you have to be rigorous, and you have to have a process. Now ISO 14971 does require us to define this process, this method of the analysis and evaluation, and also the criteria for evaluation. How are we going to analyze and evaluate our overall risk? We have to define it upfront so that it is not arbitrary. Okay, so with this introduction, and I again wait for you guys to share more questions and comments. Let me see, Ed, you have now shared another comment here. In my experience, you need a wide variety of experts. We use product liability insurance and legal experts, clinical and medical experts with current experience in the device and its use, very experienced engineers, regulatory, very experienced experts, as well as experts in the application of risk management. Great point. Diversity of viewpoints, diversity of expertise, relevancy of the expertise, and how current it is. ISO TR 24971 makes another very key point and recommendation that these experts should preferably be independent, meaning they don't have a stake in the whole process. They are not, for example, involved in the design and development process. More of an independent body of experts is more credible, more reliable. Maybe you have them sign conflicts of interest forms before you bring them in. Maybe you document that. So Bijan, coming to your point, how can we defend it? By showing our due diligence, by showing our honesty and transparency and a process behind it. And acknowledging that we are not going to be perfect. Acknowledging that this is a judgment and there is uncertainty around that. Now, if we are aware of that uncertainty and we lay out the plans to improve that level of certainty, maybe we identify additional risk mitigation opportunities post-launch, for example, and follow up on that. We have a probably good case because nobody is expecting us to be perfect. Even FDA, and let me go into the guidance a little bit, and Ed, you mentioned there are several guidances. There are one I want to focus on a little bit. It is called Factors to Consider When Making Benefit Risk Determination in PMAs and de novos. It's a very good framework. In my opinion, I think they have provided a very good framework, an excellent framework with a hypothetical example. They have provided to you worksheets. Those worksheets have questions that you can follow. There is a section on benefits. Then there's a section on uncertainty of benefits. There's a section on risks, uncertainty on the risk. And there's an overall section on the benefit risk evaluation because FDA has to make that judgment before they decide to clear or approve our product, right? So they have a process and they're telling you what their process is. So I recommend you should consider that process and see how well it might work for you. So I want to share an hypothetical example with you because this is very interesting. And I want to read that from my screen. It's example 1 in their guidance. An implantable device is developed to treat a severe chronic condition for patients who have failed all other treatment options. So this is another important factor. Are there any other options available for the patients? If not, maybe your calculation, your assessment, your judgment is different. Now this device is studied in a pivotal clinical trial with a design where all participants are implanted with the device, but the device is only turned on in half of them. After completion of the trial, inactive devices can be turned on. The primary endpoint for the trial is the magnitude of the benefit. That is, the trial is designed to measure how well the device reduces the subject's symptoms as compared to the current standard of care. The results of the pivotal clinical trial reveal the following. Benefits. So now they are quantifying the benefits. Based on the clinical study, it is inferred that the probability that a patient will experience a substantial benefit when the device is implanted is 75%. The trial was considered to have met its primary endpoint. As a general matter, patients with the disease who are able to maintain good mobility tend to have a longer life expectancy. So we are estimating 75% chance that the patients will experience significant benefit. But we are not able to tell who will benefit mostly and who will not. We cannot differentiate that. Now let's look at the risks. The study showed there is a very low probability of occurrence, less than 3%, of harmful events after the device implantation. One thing to point out here is that FDA doesn't look at individual harms at this stage. They look at the totality of harms and they look at the totality of an estimate. Of course, there'll be uncertainty around that. So it gives you an example. They're estimating 3%. However, all implanted devices that require a surgical procedure carry their own risks. And in this case, it is high risk that the literature about the implantation of this device is saying it's not routine. And there's a 1% chance of death from surgery. So 3% overall, 1% chance of death. Very high severity outcome, right? So we have some kind of a sort of scale to compare. We are expecting about 3%, but 1% could die. And even if there is no issue, this is a long-term implant, so there might be other issues over time. This is the kind of analysis that is going on, driven by that checklist. So let's look at uncertainty. Additional factors. It is difficult to discern the mechanism of action by which subject symptoms improved. Could it be just surgery, or was it the device? The trial ended after 1 year, so we don't know the long-term benefits, long-term risks. There's only a 75% chance. But look at the patient perspective they are providing. The sponsor provided data showing that most patients are willing to take the risk of having the device implanted even for a 75% probability of benefit because the alternative treatment options do not work for them. That's the baseline they are comparing it with. If you have an already existing product in the marketplace, you could compare your risk profile even one by one with the risk profile of that product and make some judgments. But if there's no other option, it is even more of a judgment, right? But it is driven by some data. So look at the FDA's approval, non-approval consideration. I want to read that to you very, very quickly. I know we are running short on time. The probability that a patient will experience a benefit is relatively high, approximately 75%, if the clinical trial results hold for the intended population. In this particular case, FDA does not have the option to limit the use of the device to only those patients who are most likely to experience a benefit because the covariates that determine the subgroup of patients who would definitely experience the benefits are unknown. So that is a level of uncertainty they have there. In addition, this type of permanently implantable device poses significant risks, and there is some remaining uncertainty associated with the trial results. However, for those patients in the target population who will experience a benefit, symptom relief and improvement in quality of life is impressive. So they are looking at patient perspective. And some patients have expressed a willingness to tolerate the risks as a trade-off for obtaining such benefits. In addition, the risks, although substantial, could be somewhat mitigated through limiting the device used to clinicians with specialized training and having your labeling and all those information available. So they wrote a paragraph. They expect an analysis and conclusion and judgment in a paragraph. And typically you would do that in your risk management report. You would look at all the available information, your own clinical trial information, literature data, talking to other experts, and you will summarize that information in a paragraph like this, providing the argument, providing a very defensible argument, credible argument, why your assessment of benefit risk is favorable. So I hope this example provides some guidance to you. I will share the link to this guidance document with you if you don't already have it. Otherwise, you can just also look up on FDA's website and find this guidance. So hey guys, we are almost out of time. So let me very quickly summarize what we talked about today. Overall, residual risk evaluation is challenging in practice because it is essentially an exercise in judgment. However, that judgment should be made by considering all available information and consultation in a cross-functional team with experts who potentially don't have a conflict of interest with the device. Wherever possible, we should compare our device with a predicate device or any other similar device. The definition of intended use matters a lot because it is in that context that we are evaluating our overall residual risk. And FDA has provided some guidance documents with very good checklist or a worksheet that you can use to follow that process if you think it's applicable to you and it might work for you. You might adapt that. They're not mandating you to use that. You can adapt it to suit your purpose, but at least you'll have a systematic process. You'll be able to document how you made those conclusions and you'll provide supporting information and assumptions made. So it's important to show our due diligence. It's important to be transparent about what we know, what we don't know, our level of certainty in our assessments, and then make sure that we provide a good, understandable, clear argument. Now, before we close, I do want to share a question that was asked at time of registration, which is very relevant. Please discuss the aspect of when to reassess the overall residual risk evaluation. how to define, that is how to plan, and determine the reaction, for example, or the response to triggers, thresholds for when the overall conclusion needs to be revisited. Very good question. So let's say you have launched the product, you're monitoring it, you went in with a certain level of certainty in your assessments and you still found it favorable. What do you do next? What should trigger your response to a to this changing situation and maybe a reassessment? So I thought about this question a little bit before coming to this session. I'll share with you only a few thoughts. We will discuss that more in future sessions. But here are my thoughts. As part of our post-market safety surveillance, we have to be very vigilant. We have to have good surveillance process in place for early detection of safety signals. If we are identifying new, unrecognized safety signals, that is a trigger potentially for us to reassess. If our earlier estimates of either the benefit, the likelihood of benefit, or the risk of harm, if our earlier estimates are not panning out, they are not within our 95% confidence interval, or we have estimated a new confidence interval which is even broader than what we had before, our level of uncertainty has actually gone up. We should reassess internally, because I'm sure regulators will reassess. And that is one of the reasons why you see post-market action from FDA in light of market activity, adverse event reporting. They do a lot of analysis. There are many situations they have done this analysis and they have gone after manufacturers in a particular way. And why? Because they do this benefit risk. They have this process, they do it. So you might want to do that as well and make that part of your post-market surveillance process. So I'm not able to tell you some specific triggers, but it all depends upon what new information you are getting. How different is it from your earlier understanding? You just didn't know anything about it before. It is something new. Can you do anything about it? Can you mitigate that? That should provide an overall trigger, not only for the individual residual risk analysis and evaluation, but also the overall residual risk and evaluation. So I kind of went through that in a hurry because I know we are running out of time, but that was a great question. And I encourage you guys to submit your questions and comments when you register, because that way we can talk about what is most important to you. Now, finally, before we go, I want to share with you some free resources that I invite you to take advantage of. Some of you are already on the knowledge sharing forum. It's a closed group. I moderate that session and we can share these ideas. We can continue our conversations. So go to my website. Here's the link and click this button and you can join for free. You can also schedule a free 30-minute one-on-one chat with me, no strings attached. My intention here is to connect and collaborate with you, get to know you a little bit better. I'm not trying to sell anything to you in those sessions. So feel free to connect. Many people actually have taken advantage of those 30-minute conversations with me, and we can have a little bit more detailed conversation about your specific situation. So I invite you to connect with me if you want. The link is there on this website and you can schedule that. So with that, guys, time flew, right? These sessions, I love these sessions and getting together with you every week. I really appreciate you guys joining and look forward to staying in contact with you through LinkedIn. I'm very active there. Please continue to share your thoughts and insights. You have a lot to share, I know, and I want to encourage you to keep doing that, because through these conversations and dialogues, we can understand these difficult concepts a lot better. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I also look forward to seeing you again next week. You might receive a very quick survey after the close of this discussion, asking you to give some feedback on the future topics or questions you want addressed in these conversations. I encourage you to let me know what's on your mind, what's important to you. And also let me know how you are feeling about these sessions. Are they useful to you? Do they provide value? What else would you like to see? How else should we change? I'm very open to your feedback. So again, thank you for joining. I look forward to connecting with you again next week.